Okay, well, I think we'll get started. So thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for tuning in on the live webcast. So today is part two in our two-part series of seeking funding. So last time we heard from Al Cooper, and today we're going to hear an alternative and complementary viewpoint from Greg Holland. So most of you know Greg. He's the head of the regional climate section in M-Cubed. He previously was the director of the NCAR Earth System Laboratory. He got his master's and PhD back in the early 80s at CSU and has experience in the world of research and private industry. He ran his own company in the late 90s, early 2000s. So he's got plenty of experience in securing funding. And the floor's all yours, Greg. Thank you very much.
Good, and push it far enough into there. Yeah. Hear me now? Yeah. I've got two slides because I thought I'd give you a sort of a little dot point by dot point of where I'm at in the organisation of the talk. It also helps older people like me to keep their thought processes together. So the title is Looking for Funding, Taking a Strategic Perspective, and when James said this was an alternative and a complementary view to what Al showed you, it is actually genuinely both, and there's two reasons for that. Firstly, I'm going to take the strategic view, where Al tended more like how do you prepare a proposal, how do you interact with NSF and things like that. I'm also going to look at not much NSF, mostly other ways of doing it. And the second thing is that I do want to emphasize, and I'll emphasize all the way through, there is no correct way of doing this. There's a whole bunch of right ways. And the right ways vary according to the individual, their temperament, their particular situation, and all sorts of other things. So I'm going to give you a perspective from someone who has largely done it the right way. But you need to pick your own way of doing this, and you need to just learn from these different viewpoints as we go along. Right, so point number one is the preamble, which I'm onto in the right and the wrong way. Let me start off with a question. How many of you know what the current success rate for proposals to NSF is? See, pessimist in the audience. You got any optimists? It's actually right now, it's between 20 and 25%. This across all divisions, and I think Geo is a little bit higher than that. It's about 26, something like that, but it's in that general area. And that varies up and down a few percentage points every year, so it's not a number. What's the success rate for the first PIAs proposing to NSF? 17%. And, that's sort of expected. You're going in, and a lot of people go in just simply saying, well, look, I'm at least going to work out how to do this. And so the first one is a tryout and such and such. But whichever way you cut and paste it, for every 5 proposals that go in, 1 comes out, funded. And that makes it a highly competitive area. And you also have to say to yourself then, well, before I go there, do you know why it's so low? When I was the age of some of the younger folks here, it was more like about 60 or 70%. Yes, I thought that would be the main reason, but when I actually read the NSF page and looked at the trends and things like that, it's a part of it. It's not the only part, and it's indeed probably not even the major part, because the funding has gone up as well. It's not like the funding stayed stable and the volume of proposals went up. They have gone up, but the funding's gone up as well. And there's definitely a gap appearing. There were 2 other reasons which were actually good reasons. One, NSF now tends to give 3 to 5 year programs where before they'd be 1 to 3. And that's great news. It's bad news if you miss out, but who the hell wants to have to go back every year? I mean, this is good for the science. And the other thing is they're actually handing out more money. So there's good and bad news in that particular process. But the reason I bring it up is, if you're going to apply to a particular organisation, the very first thing you should do is go and have a look at the success rate. And I'm going to come back to that because cost benefit is an important part of what you should be doing. The second thing is, what is it that makes for a good research proposal? Al went through a whole bunch of good reasons, but what he did was he went through essentially reasons of what you do after you've picked up the pen. My attitude is that picking up the pen is about 5% of what you should have put in. And the other 95%, argue with me and I'll make it 90%, should have been what you did in the previous 15 years. And that's where we're at here. Because if you're going to do nothing else but look and watch all of the requests for funds that come out, or requests for proposals that come out, sorry, then what you're going to do is you're going to forever be in this, oh my God, can I do that one? Yes, I can't. Let's apply for it. If you actually take a strategic view, not only will you be ready for them better when they come, you'll be much better prepared when new ones in new areas or new trends come on, and you can be in early. And thirdly, and don't laugh, I've done this, you actually will be one of the people influencing what that request for proposals does and says. It's not illegal. If you're actually doing very good research and things like that, your opinion gets asked. If you're doing very good research, people tend to sort of say, okay, there's this work done here, how can we benefit off it, and things like that. So you need to think those things through as you're getting into the program. Let's go to the guts of the talk, which is adopting a long-term perspective. And the start to that point is you. It's not me, it's not your boss, it's not the people that are actually handing out the money, it's you. Because if you don't understand you, then you've already come from behind when you go to do the proposal. And by you, there's any number of ways you can describe you, but I live on a fairly simple, basic set of rules, and they've never let me down. And one of them is a thing called Jungian psychology. How many people know who Jung is? J-U-N-G. Huh? How many people have read his analytic psychology? Well, first of all, don't read the bloody original. It's absolutely the worst written science I've ever seen. But get something that explains it a little bit better. And his analytic psychology is based on a thing called ANIMES, A-N-I-M-E-S, and I'm sure you've heard them, maybe not in that context, but he was the one that invented the word. And basically what he said was that everyone, indeed every animal for that matter, but everyone, we'll stick just to human beings, has an aneme, and often, in most cases, actually more than one. And that aneme stays with them through their whole life. It's hardwired into you. It may have been hardwired after birth, it may have been hardwired at birth. Who knows? But it's hardwired into you. And if you try and sort of make yourself into a different sort of person, you can be sort of successful at it. But that's like if you're one-legged, can you become a famous runner? Well, yeah, you could sort of run, but you wouldn't be good at it. In other words, if you do the things that fit you, you've already taken away a number of difficulties. And the sort of things that anemes are, you can do the test. Go on. There's any number of these commercial sites, well, not commercial even, educational type sites where you go in and you go through this list of things and it says, do you enjoy doing it this way? Do you enjoy doing it? And you tick all these boxes and you go right through and it comes up with 4 letters. And that's you. And I did that first about 30 odd years ago. And I've done it since, actually last week, because I thought I'll just go back and do it again. I got exactly the same set of 4 letters, which means I'm a boring old sod, but that's all right. The 4 letters I'm not going to say who I am, but the 4 letters are things like creativity, inbuilt leadership, likes taking risks, doesn't like taking, all these have got a negative, doesn't like taking risk and so on. And if you go and look at any successful team, pick football teams, basketball teams, science teams, teams that go to war, they've all got a right mix of those sorts of people because everyone together makes up for a much better mix. So if you're a person that really likes taking risks, and you like being out on the edge, and I'm definitely one of them. I mean, I can't stand it when I'm not about to die, basically. But the thing is that if you're one of those people, then you're going to go about the proposal process in a whole different way. If you're a natural-born leader, you're going to go about it in a different way. If you're not a natural-born leader, don't be ashamed about it, because that's not the point. For every successful composing and writing team, there is a good composer and a good lyricist. And you look at some of the composers, they couldn't write lyrics if their life depended upon it, and vice versa. Indeed, one that I can think of, which you know very well, had an insignificant little band called the Beatles. One of the lyricists couldn't even write music. So the point here is that if you get the right teams together, you'll do it well. So for yourself, work out how you want to go and work out what's best for you. And having worked that out, stick with it. Point number one. What was the other point I wanted to say there? Yeah, that was basically it in there. The next one on the line here is develop a personal strategy. We've just gone through the UCAR strategic planning process. How many people read the strategic plan? My goodness. That's actually quite remarkable. What do you think about a strategic plan? As you know, oh God, just another waste of time? Yeah, at one level they are. The plan itself is not the important thing. The important thing is developing the plan, because by developing the plan, it makes you go back and think about what's important to you, where you really want to go, and also gives you a chance just to sort of philosophize around a little bit and think out where you want to go. Then you come up with a strategy. And the strategy has to be flexible. And one of the really bad things about strategic plans is once you get them going, you actually have some groups will then follow them slavishly. I mean, I'm not kidding. There's some administrator each morning gets up and says, we haven't done the 45th line of the 766 page. And that's not what strategic plans are about. They're about setting you off in a direction, and they should be modified as and when you like, but you should modify them consciously. So if you take me as an example, I came up through a fairly, let me say, interesting sort of circuit to get to being back at university and getting a job. I literally fell into meteorology. I had no idea what meteorology was until I actually applied for the job. Then thought maybe I should read up on it a bit. Got into meteorology and said, this is terrific. This is what I want to do. And in the Bureau of Meteorology, they put you into a training school which taught you all the basic meteorology, how to write a forecast, how to send a balloon up, all that sort of stuff. And up till that point, I had not once in my life had any idea where I was going. You know, I'd be walking down the street and Tom would come along and say, hey, you know, you want to go to West Australia? And I'd go to West Australia with him. It was just literally that, just wandered along. But when I came out of there, I started to think, really, you know, I want to go seriously into this game. And I actually sat down and spent a couple of months reading up and looking at where I wanted to go. And I chose going to Darwin. And I was the top of the course, so wherever I chose, I went. And everyone else thought I'd gone stark staring bonkers because Darwin was the little backwater. Who the heck wants to go to the tropics, you know? Haven't you read up on all of this subtropical, interesting, dynamic or physical stuff and things like that? Well, what I did was, in the reading, it was so damned obvious the tropics were going to take off. So I went there deliberately to do that, and the rest of my life I've been in the tropics. Now, I have actually, I might go into boring details, but I've made other strategic plans which didn't work out. But along the way, I also was quite happy and actually quite enjoy exploring the byways. And some of the best things that have happened to me have been on the byways. The fact that I'm standing here is a byway. I'd set up my company, run the company, sold the company, retired. I was going to retire. I wasn't going to continue on in meteorology. I got a phone call saying, you know, there's this job open. And I thought, oh, God. And applied, and I'm still here, and it's been one of the best times of my life. So don't be afraid to explore the byways as well. I know a lot of this sort of sounds boring, and say, yeah, what the hell, this is obvious, and this, you know, give me something I can use. Well, I am giving you something you can use. And I'll tell you another fact of life, and that is that I've given talks like this to both students, people I've been mentoring, and groups for maybe 20 years now, including young kids and that at school. And I would say of those that I know, maybe 20% actually took any notice of it. And I don't know any of those 20% that weren't successful in what they did. So, I mean, you make your own mind up, but if you actually adopt these sort of ideas, you'd be surprised how you go. So develop a personal strategy and keep it flexible. Network. At one level, I think you all, no, I don't think, I know you all know how to do this well. Science nowadays is a highly collaborative area. And we get really good, you know, at sort of working with our friends and our colleagues and developing interactions outside our immediate sphere of influence. And that's to your great scientific benefit. If for no other reason that if you don't do that, when it comes to promotions as a scientist, for example, and people don't send in decent letters of review, you're not going to get up there. So basically there's incentives to do that. Networking is much more than that. Networking is what you should be starting to do now with a plan on the future about how you're going to get funding. You say, yeah, right, I'm going to go up and see the president of, or the director of NSF and have a chat with them. Well, no, you're not. But you know something? I bet you the next director of NSF will be someone you'll meet in the next 4 or 5 years. Not the next, the future director. The current director of NSF, I had met in a very casual sense some time ago. The current person running NOAA. We actually had a long period of interaction on a particular potential for proposal. So the point is, the people that you're going to be up there later on are the people that are around you right now. And it doesn't do any harm to network, and it doesn't do any harm to sort of just get those feelings. You spend a lot of that time just having a good time. It does require socializing. I think when I was your age, I spent about 3/4 of my time in the pub, but it never did me any harm. It does require socialising because you don't just simply, you're not formal about it, and the more you can actually catch up. And when you go to a conference, the same thing. In those days, it was actually, in the old days, it was pretty good because the NSF people, program managers, came to every significant conference. And we'd go out to dinner with them. It was really good. I can't remember the last time I saw an NSF person at the specialist conferences. They go to the annual meetings and things like that, but at the specialist conference. And I think that's a real pity. So network. And in networking, start to think where you'd like to get and where you'd like to find money. And NSF is one place to go, but it's a tough game, and it's tougher if you're at NCAR than if it's anywhere else, because you do have a whole bunch of restrictions on you. In my life, I went out and counted them for this talk, for the first ever, properly counted them. I've got about the mid-80s, 85% of all the proposals I put in were actually funded. And something like about 40% were not funded. I say something like because I'm sure I've forgotten a couple that I didn't get funded, and I've just forgotten I actually put them in. In all those proposals, and there's lots of them, I've only ever actually put 3 proposals in as PI to NSF, and I've never put a proposal into the Australian Research Council, which is the Australian equivalent. Australian Research Council is currently funding between 5 and 10% of applicants. So never. That's not where I got my money from. I got most of my government money from Agriculture, Department of Energy, NASA, Office of Naval Research, and that's aside from the Bureau of Meteorology, who was paying my salary and various other things. And for non-government money, I've got funds from a whole range of industries, from the offshore energy industry to the insurance, reinsurance industry, and a whole bunch of other folks. So who would like to start looking at those alternatives? Yeah. Who has started looking at those alternatives? Yeah. I know you have, yeah. It's a hard game to be in. Disagree with me, Tom, if you like. You know, industry is a group of people who are focused on one thing: bringing it in on time, on budget, and making a profit. because their owners are the shareholders, and if they don't make a profit that year, the shareholders get upset at them. So it is very easy for you to get approached and for you to actually end up going into basically consulting mode. And nothing wrong with that. I've done a little bit of consulting, but I always do it as a little bit. I don't ever get into that role. I deliberately never got into that role at all. But you can sell research to them. You can, because I have, and I know a number of other people that have. And what you say is things like, for example, someone comes along and says, hey, I need advice on this. And you say, here's the advice. And did you know that there's a problem here, but if you were to support this level of this type of research, then you know, here is the sort of advice we could give you back. Or you say, you get people come in and say, can you tell me what's known about such and such? And you say, well, there's actually not that much known about that such and such. And they say, well, why doesn't the government pay for it? And you immediately go back and say, yeah, well, the government doesn't pay for everything, and if you want it, why don't you pay for it? And then the answer is, we're not going to pay for it because the government pays for it, and why should I pay for it so my competitor can have it? How to answer that one? You know the way to answer that one? And it works 100% of the time. You just simply say, yes, your competitor will get this, but you'll get it while I'm doing it. Your competitor will get it after I've published it. And 2 years is a lot of profit in the industry, a lot of profit. And you've compromised nothing. You've not compromised one iota of your research. You've not actually been a consultant. Well, you're sort of a consultant in the sense you've got to advise them as you're going along, but that's no more than you do to NSF and your projects. And suddenly you're actually off and running. And so try actually working those things out. Next time you're at an annual meeting, you go wandering around all the pretty little displays, go to a couple of industry people. See if you can get yourself invited, or at least even offer up to give a briefing talk to an insurance conference. If you get invited, say yes. Because you'd be surprised what comes out of all of that. And in the last decade, leaving out my company in the last 25 years, there is not a single dollar of research I've got that wasn't made possible by the fact that I had industry money. So it's not a trivial matter, and it's something for you to pursue. That's a network. Monitor and influence trends. I briefly pointed towards this earlier. Let's take an example, the Earth Atmosphere System Modelling Fund, requests for proposals that are coming out now, or are out and people are in. What do you reckon the chances of getting one of them up now are in this round? I'll be very surprised if it's 20%, because it is way oversubscribed. When we put up our first round of proposals, we got 2. Because I'm not saying that they were bad proposals, they were actually very good proposals, but the point was, no one had actually got their game going. NCAR was in a perfect position to do it because we already had the Earth system modelling bits. We were already doing the work. We just had to sit down and think about how to make it all work and put the proposal in. So there's an example of where you're actually monitoring a trend and you jump in at the beginning. You're going to fail. You know, you'll fail at a lot of things. You'll fail at some things, but I bet you fail at less things than if you go in after the trend has really got going and after everyone is sort of running along behind it. Excuse me. The other thing is try and influence trends. It's a little bit harder, but you know, if you're off exploring a little byway and there is something really promising down there, then go for it. Spend a bit of time out there. It's sort of easy for me to say because I could say, well, what the hell? I got a bit of base funding so I can charge off. And I know if you don't have base funding, these things are hard, but you can still do it. You can do it with soft money as well as base funding. But go down and explore it a bit. You know, the worst thing that's going to happen is your experience level and your experience base will go up a little bit. And the best thing that's going to happen is you'll see something down there and really run with it. And the one byway which I'll use as an example, is my company. Back in the early 90s, I was trying to find ways of actually making reconnaissance of tropical cyclones, and we put up 2 failed proposals to the government for aircraft reconnaissance, and I thought, give it up. So, okay, let's go looking. And I'd heard vaguely about unmanned aircraft. So, well, let's go look at unmanned aircraft, and ended up at Boeing, and they quoted me $70 million for the first one. I sort of, thanks very much, I'll see you later. And then started really thinking about it and started getting serious about, these can't be all that hard to make. And then I met an aeronautical engineer, Canadian aeronautical engineer at a meeting in the US, and he'd been thinking along the same lines. We got together and we actually put together the first unmanned aircraft reconnaissance for meteorology. We hold most of the records for firsts in meteorology, including the first unmanned aircraft across the North Atlantic. This was a 10-foot wingspan aircraft. We sat down and worked out all the theory and everything. We said, we can do this. 10-foot wingspan aircraft. So that's from here to there. And we flew it across the North Atlantic. It took 26 hours and used 1 3/4 gallons of fuel. And when we started off, everyone says, you are completely and utterly stark, staring bonkers. And we said, no, look, we've done the theory. The theory has no assumptions in it. And it worked. And then we sort of kept on going. Then a few other companies started appearing. Then suddenly the big boys got interested. And it was time to get out of this little byway because I lost one major contract. I mean, really big contract, which I lost because a certain major aerospace company decided they wanted to get into this game. They had no small unmanned aircraft of any consequence, but they had a hell of a good lobbyists in Washington. And so at that stage, that's when I got out. But it was fun, and I have to say it didn't do me any harm financially either. But if you go back to my strategic plan back in the early 90s, it did not include aircraft. It did not include going out of meteorology. But suddenly you're out there, then I came back in, and on we go. So do explore the byways. I'm going to ask for questions there, because before I go on to the next bit, that's a sort of a logical spot to stop and see what sort of questions you have, or if you have any ideas. Or
Yeah, and I've got the microphone here because it's being recorded, so
yeah,
I'll run around.
Hello to all the people out in the nether. Come on, you've got to have a question or two.
So to what extent was your, before you started your company, to what extent after you started your company, did your balance of funding vary? Like, versus private versus governmental. Did when you went into the company, or when you developed your company, did that end up making more private funding available? Or did you find it was no difference between being academic versus a company?
To start with, it was no different because, I'd already got some of the funding, and that sort of went over with me. And we also picked up about $6.5 million out of a special fund the government had set up to promote small businesses, so it was still government. And then after we got through that 3 to 4 year phase of developing the aircraft to a stage where it actually flew and people could see it, then we started going for commercial contracts, and there it was nearly 100%, but it was nearly 100% because we only actually went to the level of putting in a contract proposal after we'd been through the discussions and worked out that they were actually interested. And indeed, a lot of them were people coming to us. Again, it's an advantage of being out where no one else is, because people are saying, oh, unmanned aircraft. And you get actually, big companies would say, we need to go over and find out what they are. And they'd come over and give you $100K just so you do something for them, just so they could see what the heck it was. But $100K to them is nothing. But the thing is that, so we picked up a few of those. I made 2 bad strategic decisions. The worst one was that I was absolutely determined we were going to do civilian operations and civilian operations only. And it cost this much to run the aircraft, and the civilians would pay that much, and the military would play to the fall. So that one went away really fast, in the sense that you just wouldn't, and you wouldn't survive now, actually. These little quadcopters and things like that, they survive out of there. But so to answer that to answer a short question, the long one, For the first 2 to 3 years, it was almost entirely government and sort of carry-ons and extra bits we got. And after that, it was almost entirely commercial. And we went up a whole bunch of dead alleys where people just obviously weren't interested in funding us, or in paying for contracts and things like that.
So one follow-up question is are the contract negotiations with these companies a little different? Because they seem like they approach you a lot more than you would approach them because they see you doing something cutting edge that they may be interested in. Am I reading that correctly?
The answer is everything he said was true, except for a little bit different. More than 50% of all the government contracts I've ever had, I was approached first. Not necessarily by the government people, but by someone that, someone that wanted to apply, or actually someone that actually had got that project up and said, we'd like you to join in on this thing. So it works both ways, but no, I'd say about 40% of those we went to them. And that's that's a very rough figure, but it certainly was up towards 50% we went to them instead of them coming to us. Any other? Yeah, Tom.
Monitor and influence the trends. It's clear that NCAR is also evolving. It's not as it was 20 years ago. And can you comment on the extent that soft money projects and people can actually identify and influence the trends that NCAR is going? So basically, influence the strategy of NCAR itself.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'm trying to think of a good answer. The first answer is that a big organization like NCAR is like the USS Eisenhower, You might want to turn now, but it's going to be 40 miles later before you start turning. So basically, things you do now could have a big effect 10, 15 years down the line, but as far as short-term effects, I don't think you're going to do that much to change the direction that NCAR is going in. But you sure as hell can add a little wart on the side of NCAR, which is going off in really interesting directions. I mean, that's essentially what the group I'm in is. It was set up as a multidisciplinary group with as many, if not more, social and other scientists and engineers and as scientists, and it's been quite successful so far. So you can set these little bits up on the side, and then things will happen fast. Move in the whole of NCAR. Captain to engine room, is there anyone there? Yeah.
One that works. More observations than questions. In the computer science area, we've seen some of the big programs with success rates I've heard in the 3 to 4% range. So which is is horrible. The other thing is that you can get a good idea and you get a few seasoned PIs on it, and by the time you add up all of their conflict lists, there's like a baboon left to review it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you get around that really, except to pick people that don't have any connections or as the PIs or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of the rest of you have seen that happen, but the reviews that have come back on some of our proposals are that there should be some kind of a process to dispute this because, factually wrong junk comes back.
There's two parts. The first one on the software engineers, or the software sciences and software engineering. Yeah, I saw a number like that when I was doing a bit of a casual scan through for what other groups do, and I couldn't find an engineering group that was more than 10%. So the engineers are actually suffering more than the scientists in this regard. Not my impression, my absolute understanding, and I know I'm correct, is in the sciences, that is not considered to be a conflict of interest. Don't quote me on the NSF rules, but the only hardwired rules that I know are things like you cannot have your supervisor be one of the reviewers on your proposal. Now, by the time you get to my age, they won't even know who supervisor is, but early on and things like that. So there's a couple like that. If you're obviously working in the same group or in the same section or something like that, it's not on. But I mean, I couldn't put in a proposal. I haven't had a paper review or a proposal review that at least most of the people, actually, I know I can call them by their first name. So it's just not possible. So I don't know why they've gone that way, but in science they haven't. They've just trusted in the good nature of people. And yeah, there's some really bitchy people out there, and they sort of have a go at you because you made some comment and they didn't like it. But I don't think it's ever affected me particularly.
Well, on a lot of solicitations now, they actually require you to pull your collaborator list off and compile it all into one gigantic spreadsheet, so that they can disqualify reviewers really efficiently. Right.
Yeah, whereas if you look at the industry funding I get, that's dominated by industry funding, they say, okay, can you tell us who we should go out to review? They'd actually ask you for the reviewer. They almost always, I think, add others in there, but they do actually ask you for reviewers as well. At some point, you've got to have some faith in human nature, otherwise it just... And of course, the problem there is if you're down to 3%, it's a tough game to be there, yeah. Any others? Well, let's move on to the next one, which will finish us up. Money. You know, at the end of the day, this is not about science, it's about money. And it's about commodities, and it's about customers. And if you don't like that, don't like it, but get used to it, because that's what it is. You're selling a commodity, and you've got a customer. And if you think, oh, no, I haven't, I'm doing all this pure science, and they fund me, well, you'll be looking very thin in a couple of months' time. It is a customer, and it is a commodity, and for God's sake, treat it like that. I'm not saying you should go out and oversell and spin doctor and all that sort of thing. That's not selling commodities. Actually, in the long run, that hurts commodities more than it helps them. They might get a short-term boost. But it is a commodity. So don't be afraid, for a start, to stress your own research. Don't be afraid to stress your qualifications for the proposal that you're putting in. But it's a very thin dividing line. Because the facts are that the people who most crow about their own abilities come from the lowest 20% of scientists. And I'm not kidding that the top 20% of scientists tend to crow less about their abilities than others. And there may be one good reason for that, because the top 20% are assuming that other people know they're good scientists. But it doesn't do any harm to tell people every now and then you're a good scientist. And you can do it in all sorts of subtle ways. You know, just make sure that if you've got an award that it gets known, and, you know, those sorts of things all sort of count up. So don't be afraid to do that. And it is about them saying, I've got so much money to spend, will I go to that shopping centre or that shopping centre? And then you come down to the commodity. And I'm not going to tell you anything about that, because you know the commodity better than I do. Your commodity is your science. And if you're working at NCAR, you've already got a bloody good commodity, so I don't have to tell you to go out and make a good commodity. You have by definition, or you didn't get a job here. So you're already ahead of the game there, but you've got a commodity and you've got a customer. And then you must adopt a business approach. I'm not joking. If you don't, you're going to be naive for the rest of your life. And the business approach you adopt is almost laughably trivial. Cost benefit. I'm going to apply for this proposal. Gee, it'd be nice to have a little bit of extra money. What's it going to cost you, and what are you going to get out of it? It takes maybe 5 minutes to think that through out of the 2 weeks you're going to spend preparing the proposal. Let me give you an example. If I put up a request for proposals and I'm going to hand out $20,000 to the successful ones. Saying, oh yeah, that's all right. I could, you know, 20,000, that's not bad. So you go away and you do it, and you go off and write up this night. You call me up a few times, you go off and write this proposal. You're successful. And then, this is just for 1 year, say, and then back I come and say, and I as was said in the request for proposals, which you haven't read properly, you've got monthly reporting, so you take a day a month to report, so that's another 2 weeks. So you got $20,000, your overheads took $11,000 that away, you got $9,000, you put in $1,000 to $1,500 for a publication, you got $8,000, $7,000, you put in $2,000 to go to a conference, and you've actually had negative money for the year. It's actually cost you to put in the proposal. It's a trivial example, but you do need to do a cost-benefit analysis and see what's worthwhile and what's not. And what goes along in hand with that is the shotgun approach to applications. I just groan when I see the way some young scientists, and I'm not naming any names, they're madly following all of the web pages and all of the emails that come out saying, there's a NASA Roses announced. Gee, I might be able to get that. And off goes a proposal, and another one goes over there, another goes over there. You should have spent that time networking. You should have spent that time writing papers. You should have spent that time basically getting to know how to do it better instead of just simply blasting them off in all directions. And don't say people don't do it, because I would say in early years of life, most young scientists do overdo that in that direction. It's easy to do. I mean, you don't have the background, you don't know where you really want to go, and you're going to apply for a few too many, and that's fine, but don't overdo it. Because if you put in 10 proposals this year, and you got 2 of them funded, no matter how much that money was for the sort of monies you're likely to get, you actually spent more money than you got that year doing it. Yeah, you might have done it at home, working on the proposal and things like that, but that's money. That's a cost. That's a cost to you. You could have been doing other things in that time. So look at the cost benefit. And it doesn't do any harm either to do a SWOT. Who knows what a SWOT is? And I don't mean a mosquito. Yeah? SWOT with an A. Strength, weaknesses, and threats. What is your strength for a proposal? What are your weaknesses for the proposal? And are there any threats? And be honest about it. If you're as weak as all hell, why the hell are you going to enter the lottery? If you're very strong, why would you not apply? So think about doing a few of those things, and it's remarkable. A lot of the very successful senior scientists do this intuitively, but if you ask them what a SWOT was, they say, what? But they do it intuitively. They know. They just sort of know what they can and they can't do. They know their weakness and they build it up by experience, but it's better if you start doing it at the beginning because you get the experience a lot faster. And in business, I never entered into anything that we didn't do that. Because I didn't have the option of a storm fund if we ran out of money. I'm running a small business with, at the peak, 45 people. You don't get a contract, you fold the business the next month. It's literally there. So you do everything like this, because if you don't survive. Whoops, don't touch that. The next one is leverage. Leverage, leverage, leverage. Anyone know what I mean? Ah. If you get $1 from a research grant, you're the PI, say, and you get $1 from that grant, and you didn't spend it twice, you didn't do your job. If you spent it 3 times, you did your job very well. If you did it 4 times, I want to come around and have a chat with you and see how you did it. But you should spend every dollar at least twice. And I don't mean going down to Mickey down the bloody parlour and putting on the local horse races or something like that. What I do with all my contracts is that I'll get $100,000 from there. And that's something that's supporting something I'm already doing, but let's just say it's supporting something that I want to move into, so it's just got me moving in that direction. So the next contract I go to, or the next time I go talk to someone trying to talk them into giving us some money, I'll say, look, you know, if you can give us $100,000, we've already got $100,000 on this, you're getting $200,000 worth of work for a $100,000 investment. And even at the NSF level, you'd be surprised how that counts. You've got to get through the review to get to that point at the NSF level, but once you get the excellent reviews and they're working out exactly where everyone's going to go, that counts big time. And I don't think, James, have we got a, where is he up there? I don't think we've got a dollar that's not doubled, is it? Yeah, all of my money has been leveraged, and leveraged openly. I mean, if you go to my NSF grant, you'll see the Zurich Insurance Company. You'll see Willis Re specifically listed in there, and how much they're putting in. They're going to put it in anyhow. The point is that actually doubled it because that helped me double it and move it away. So do look at the options. Don't just get a grant and say, oh yeah, I don't have to worry for the next year and a half. I can go off and do research. Say, okay, I've got a grant. Is there anything I can do with it? And even if you can't do anything then, just keep it in the back of your head and say, well, 6 months' time, well, wait a minute. I just heard something that maybe I can leverage this against that, and off we go. And particularly if you decide that you want to work substantially on the private industry side, leverage is it on the private industry side. That's me. That's me telling me to go away. There. It's me telling me it's 45 minutes. Rather, that's my duck telling me it's 45 minutes. Yeah.
While you're on the subject of leverage, everybody knows now that you have to write a data management plan for every proposal. Even if it says, I'm not producing any data, that's your plan. But that's not usually the case around here. So across the organization, and I'm in Don Middleton and Sizzle, is we do have easy mechanisms for publishing data sets. We can help you with your data management plans. Another point, Matt's been leading up the data citation effort across the organization, and we're minting digital object identifiers and data citations.
Yep.
And for young scientists, those are now allowed in that second set of publications. You can put a citation in there, put a DOI in there, and populate that. So if the result of your research work produces a data collection, and you published it and you shared it, that gets to go on your resume, for NSF at least. So there's some other things around the organization, and there's folks working on trying to do this better as a NCAR, UCAR entity. But, and ditto goes for visualization. We often have scientists that have proposed research work, and they come to us later on, they say, boy, we'd really like to do some visualization work, and we try to cover that. But budgets being where they're at, if you can look, if you think you want some very nice visuals or movies or something, or data collections and data management, you know, getting with people beforehand and planning that out, and maybe putting a little in the proposal to cover that, I think can make it a better proposal. It can make writing a data management plan a lot easier. For the polar community, we actually have a template for them and a repository for all Arctic researchers. So just want to throw that out. That's some things that are a little off your axis on leveraging, but you know, this organization has a lot of resources that can really help people put together a successful proposal, and probably one in less time and effort. Most of the scientists I hear from is kind of like they write a proposal and they're interested in the science, and they're like, got to write a data management plan.
And that's why NSF make you write a data management plan, so you have to, otherwise you never would. But it's a good point, and it's another form of leveraging, because working in NCAR, there are a lot of resources around, from people with experience in writing proposals and people with experience at various other parts, to visualization, to the enormous resources up at Sizzle. And not only that, people like Sizzle, I'll use that as the example since that come up, will actually adjust their own ways of doing things to fit what you need if you've got these sorts of things coming up in your proposals. So for example, then they've got this new data portal. I think we were one of the first on it, weren't we? And it saved us an enormous amount of additional work for ourselves. So basically, that's money in hand as far as I'm concerned. And you know why it's leveraging? because they build out of your overheads, along with other things. But the point here is that that's what NCAR, that's part of the reason you have overheads. It supports those sorts of things. Yeah. Man, you got to run now, halfway to the moon. She lives in Netherlands, so she doesn't know how to come close.
Not anymore. I gave in. I have been approached several times now by European scientists wanting me to put on European grants, and I always have to turn it down because of the overhead. On the other side, collaborating makes sense because then you become internationally known. Collaboration can be a really nice way of working together and be known. Any advice on that? Because I end up then basically, if you have to turn it down, you get some travel money out of it. And if you're really interested in a project, you end up working on it anyway, but you don't get paid for it, which is probably the worst of both worlds. You wouldn't do it for.
What was the problem with being paid for it again?
Sorry?
What was the problem with you being paid for it?
You can't get being paid because NCAR doesn't accept the overheads they're willing to pay, which is not as much as NCAR does. So you can't get any funding out of European projects because NCAR doesn't accept.
No, I understand it.
That's something you would say to turn down or to pursue?
There are ways around it, and I'm not going to tell you in public company. Legal ways around it. But the thing is that, firstly, let me say something in defense of also and in annoyance at UCAR. It's UCAR, not NCAR, that do the overheads. The UCAR overheads are not acceptable. I mean, 50% was at the barely acceptable level, 55, 56% is not acceptable, and they know that and they're trying to get them down. But, you know, well, they tell me they're trying to get them down, so that's that part. Secondly, they're about the middle on overheads. They're not the highest by a long shot. There's lots of universities with higher overheads than NCAR, lots with lower. And if you go into private industry, overheads typically run at about 200 to 300%. So for each $3 you get $1. That sort of number. So basically, that's as a general comment. How do you actually handle it? Well, there's ways you can actually. There's ways that NCAR and UCAR will accommodate overheads to some extent. It costs someone else, so it's got to be sort of something that you've got to work through. So go have a talk to the admin, and I'm sure they know how to do that. Secondly, you don't have to get money necessarily. The travel money, that's fine. That's a different thing. But you don't have to get money. I've had graduate students. I've had actually postdocs. So basically say, look, you know, can you pay for a postdoc? They're paying for them, and they're here as a visitor. And that's perfectly acceptable. So there's other ways of actually going about it. But the overheads, yeah, we all bitch and complain about overheads, but we don't mind our, our TIA CREF and our medical benefits and all those sorts of things either. So it's a thing that goes both ways. Because unfortunately in the US, the government doesn't pay those expenses. In Australia at a university, there is essentially no overheads. Because the government picks up all the costs for the people. If you're paying for a graduate student, you basically just pay their salary and a little bit extra. It's not much extra. So, but that's just the way they decide to fund it in Australia. There's a lot less research funding in Australia as well, proportionally. So it works both ways. Don't be afraid of doing international, by the way. That works also in the other direction. I can't possibly ever get any US government money when I was internationally. Well, actually, no, I got O&R. They were a special case. And that's because they don't recognize borders, because they're defense. But the rest of them, you can't actually get any money, but you could get a whole bunch of other things like students and everything else. Where was I? Leverage. Yeah, so that was basically it. I guess in sort of concluding, you need to understand who you are and what you're good at and what you're bad at. That's the first step you should do. If you haven't done it already, do it. You just sit down and think about it in the evening one night, and you think about it and you're driving to work or something like that. it's not long to actually do your own little analysis of what you're good and bad at. You also really should go off and do that Jungian little, who's done it, by the way? The one where you log on, yeah, there's a few people done it. It's easy to do. And then, having done that, sort of be honest with yourself about what your capabilities are, where you want to go, and then start to really and truly hammer it and do it properly. Get out and network. Get out and find people. Get out and find who's there. And realize that it's going to take you 10 years. So in the meantime, you're still going to have to apply for random grants that come up and things, random proposals, random requests for fundings that come up and such, because you're actually in that learning phase. But after 10 years, suddenly it goes the other way, and now you're off and you're actually in good shape. So do all of those things. And whenever you're going to do and along the way, you're going to change trends. You're going to influence trends. You may do it a little bit, you may do it a lot. But if you do, and you're there at the beginning, it's low-hanging fruit, and it sure as hell tastes sweet. But when you actually get down to the money, act like a business person. And by a business person, do a cost-benefit analysis. You see a $100,000 grant, don't say, gee, $100,000 would be nice. Say, $45,000 would be nice, because that's what you're going to get. And also, don't apply for little grants unless you really have to. It's okay to get travel money and things like that. That's not an issue. But a $20 or a $30 or a $40 or a $50,000 grant will have usually more overheads than a $500,000 grant. So you actually end up mostly just working for yourself, working for them, I mean, instead of getting your own things done. And I mean, I have had a principle for many years, and very many years now, that I would never even think about a grant that was less than $100,000. And it's even rare I get those sort of level of grants. And don't get me wrong, at your age, 100K is a nice bit of money to have in the pocket. But don't be unrealistic about that in that context. And yeah, who's gone after small grants? Yeah. Oh no, strategic or for travel money, that's a different thing. Yeah. 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 Yep.
Sorry about that.
You need to hold it up a bit there as well. Yeah.
Well, I'm done. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So the point there is a very good one. You may actually go for a small grant as a strategic thing. In other words, just to get you sort of known in the area or something like that. That's a different situation. But if you're going at it to do research, you're wasting your time. And the other thing is, I should have said this right up the beginning, do deliver more than you promised. I'm not saying you got to do the research you set off to do, you don't know where you're going to end up. So you can't actually, you will change directions. We all change directions. But the point is, at the end of the day, have them think and believe that you actually did more than they'd expected of you in that period. And that means you don't oversell it to start with, and then you sure as heck make sure you deliver to the spade. And if they want to talk to you, you don't say, oh, golly, I haven't got time today, can I call you tomorrow? All right? It's not good vibes. And so to take that sort of attitude, and you'll be in good shape. The final one is the leverage. Once you get money, that is your step to the rest of your life. It's not the funding for the next year. Look how you can build on it. Look how you can leverage it. Look how you can do things with it. And I think that's about it. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thanks very much, Greg. Any one final question or comment before we leave it?
There's been a few speak, but the rest of you have been sitting there saying, no.
You probably answered this in your long-term perspective section, but I'm just wondering if you wanted to say anything, or you could say anything in particular about these. There's a trend in funding where it's a huge project that has to be interdisciplinary, and how, as a young scientist, would you have any advice how people can set themselves up to get involved with these types of, I guess, FESD or whatever they're called, big calls?
Yeah, I actually deliberately didn't go down that path because I wanted to talk to you about things that you could do right now, but as time goes on, you'll get involved in them. It's something you do later on in life where you want to really and truly make your burst and you've actually got a big network and things like that. It is an enormous amount of work. An FSC will occupy several people for a year doing almost nothing else. It's an unbelievable amount of work, and you get zero if you get zero. So basically, you've got to do your own SWOT analysis and work out where it's going to go. They've got to do their SWOT analysis. Your question was, how do you get involved in it? That's usually not all that difficult in FSC. You find out it's coming up. People like to have there being demonstrated interest, which they can both include in the proposal, but also if you get in early, they don't have to think about who they're going to get. And all of those FSCs, or whatever other name they're given nowadays, pretty well without exception that I know of, require the PI to hire postgraduate and graduate people and relatively junior scientists, because a part of the reason for the FSC being there is to help people make careers through the sciences. So it's not like you're coming from behind. You've got a selling point. But if you're going to go and see one, do your own SWOT again. If it's a FSC and beer drinking, you're going to have to get in behind me because I'm going to be there ahead of you. But no, I'm serious about that. If it's an FSC that really doesn't relate, don't bother. But if it's an FSC that does relate. The final point there is you're young enough not to have any hang-ups, whereas a lot of senior scientists in particular have got real hang-ups about cross-disciplinary work. If you're not going to do cross-disciplinary work, go find somewhere else to work, because you won't be working in 20 years' time. And it's not like it's hurting your science. I mean, it helped my science big time to get into multidisciplinary. It's great fun because you get a whole different perspective coming in. You get all sorts of different ideas coming around. It takes you a while to learn each other's language, but once you get through that stage, so if you're thinking about just being a disciplinary person, you'll be a rare animal in 20 years' time.
Quick question about leveraging. And you said that you had, at one point, you'd list sort of the other companies that have pitched in money or groups that have pitched in money to sort of leverage that proposal for more funding. And because there is some connection between the two, and you say, well, there's some overlap. So I know usually when you do grants, you have to sort of dedicate percentage of time that you are going to commit to a certain project. So I guess, how do you handle that discrepancy? Like, you've already committed 70%, for example, to a project on that one grant, and then you're trying to use it to leverage another, and he says, well, I'm going to commit 70% to you too. Or how do you handle that?
How I handle that is, for my entire life, since I got my first grant, my second grant, I spent the whole time hoping to hell that the project managers wouldn't get together and add that number up. But again, coming back, they're not going to add it up if you're actually delivering. No one comes and bean counts if you're delivering. and the reality is that, yes, you're spending 10% on one and 10% on the other, and you don't have that spare 10%, but they're both the same anyhow. So all you're doing is the group itself is producing a lot more for your effort. So it works out to be quite well in that sense. But no, we all run up against the, oh my God, I hope they don't come in that door.
Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there. Let's thank Greg again for his insights.